if you follow a truly low carb diet, and you can mentally do it and stick with it, which is not hard, which is very hard, you truly will need, especially for a type 1 diabetic, you will need a ridiculously low amount of insulin. You're essentially, you're not eating any carbs. You're shutting down your carb metabolism, basically. And you just you need a crazy low amount, and people, they think that's a good thing, but it's not. You're coming at a price. It's a band-aid solution, and it's still not solving the core issue of type 1 diabetes. And just because you're taking a crazy low amount of insulin doesn't mean you're healthier.
Right. Or that you're doing better in terms of diabetes.
Right, exactly, because it's not just about numbers. Like, also the other thing is, people get very confused. I mean, I understand the confusion in the diabetes community, partly because it's one of the only diseases where you can self-diagnose yourself meal by meal. You can't really self-diagnose how your heart disease is doing. You can't really self-diagnose how's my cancer doing.
Nope.
But your diabetes, you can continue to get feedback right away.
Even with the endocrine diseases, it changes week by week, month by month, but not minute by minute.
Right.
Maybe the only thing else that you could do it with would be something like if you had emphysema or something.
True. Right.
Yeah, but it's that critical though. It's literally moment to moment with the diabetic.
Yeah, and so when somebody does do the low carb thing, because you're not eating any carbs and you're taking a crazy low amount of insulin, your blood sugar, it truly doesn't really fluctuate. That's if you can maintain it. I mean, you're going to have cravings and you're going to want, some carbs and stuff. But if you can maintain and stay on that low fat, sorry, I meant to say low carb, your blood sugar is not going to fluctuate. And people also think that's a good thing. But it's coming at a price, and it's not just about those numbers.
And you mentioned when you did it, though, that you did the program and you had less insulin use, which you've now clarified a little bit, but you didn't feel all that great. How about when you went to 80-10-10? Did you notice any changes in your energy or your mindset or any other changes besides just the ones relating to insulin?
Well, first I want to say I was taking less insulin, but if you look at the insulin to carb ratio of people doing a low carb diet, that will show that their insulin sensitivity has decreased. Right. So yes, you're taking less insulin, but your insulin sensitivity is not good. I mean, if you're eating like 30 carbs a day and you're taking 10 units of insulin, that's a 1 to 10 ratio. I mean, it's not that good. So anyways, when I went on, when I got off that and I started doing, your book wasn't out yet, so I didn't know exactly what I was doing. So in the beginning of the transition, I was doing lots of green smoothies and stuff like that, and I was feeling amazing. I was taking a little bit more insulin, but the insulin sensitivity was improving dramatically.
And then, since we've led into this, let's expand on it a little more. I always use the phrase grams of carbohydrates to units of insulin.
Right.
The ratio, grams of carbohydrates to units of insulin. To me, this is super, super important. And I know it is to you as well. And you're sort of relating that or almost referring to that ratio as what you're calling insulin sensitivity.
Yes.
So can you explain a little bit more about that? And did you see changes in insulin sensitivity when you started using 80-10-10?
Yes, I saw a dramatic change in the sense that basically I got to a point where the total amount of insulin I was taking, but it was a little bit more than what I was doing on the Cousins program. I wish I had exact numbers and I could remember them. I probably need to go back to the old emails. But basically I got to a point where I was taking pretty much about a little bit less, close to the same amount of insulin that I was taking when I was doing the standard American diet and eating, not very many carbs. So I'm taking a healthy amount, a good general range for what a type 1 should take, and I'm eating what they would consider a crazy amount of carbohydrates. I'm talking like 700 grams of carbohydrates per day. And a regular diabetes diet wouldn't recommend going somewhere above like 150 or something. That would be closer to the high end. So at that point, when you're
So you're
eating
so you're
any
eating
carbohydrates
you're
and
eating
still
6 or 7 times the amount of carbohydrates and taking the same amount of insulin.
pretty
Yeah,
much,
that's pretty astonishing.
yeah,
That's actually beyond astonishing. But again, this is the numbers that normally when I'm talking to people and I say if we can come up with a way of measuring it that we're all happy with, you can anticipate seeing about a 75% improvement in this grams of carbohydrate to units of insulin ratio, which is about what you're talking about.
yeah, absolutely. That's about right.
Cool.
And
Let
every case is unique. I mean, you're going to come across some people who not only is their insulin sensitivity and insulin to carb ratio going to improve, but they're also going to end up actually taking less total amount of insulin. So there's different ways to look at it. What's the total units you inject, and the insulin to carb ratio? But there's going to be a lot. In some situations, that somebody's going to completely not only be eating way more carbs, but literally taking less total units of insulin. Absolutely,
is
will
there
happen.
a downside to taking insulin?
Um, I think I mean, obviously, there's like a continuum. I think you can get to a point where it's ridiculous. You shouldn't be injecting like 100, 150 units a day. That's crazy. But I think there's a
But
range.
why is
There's
it
a healthy
crazy?
range.
But why is it
Insulin is necessary. It's required. I mean, it's part of a healthy human functioning. So this whole movement of people talking about being anti-insulin is just completely incorrect. It's blown out of proportion.
right? It's life-saving.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's essential. Healthy people who have no diseases are producing, a healthy amount of insulin. It's part of our bodily functions.
Um, I know sometimes people get a little upset. They go, "Well, I don't want to take a drug, or I don't want to take an antibiotic," and I'm going, like, 100 years ago you would have died,
Yeah.
and now you're alive because of this medical miracle. I'm not going to deny the medical miracle.
Right.
Um, a couple of 100 years ago, half the population of the world would be blind, and now they wear glasses and they can see really well. And should we just say, well, you know, if there's ways to improve your vision to a point where you don't need glasses, well, that's all great.
Right.
And if there's a way to get off insulin, that's all great. But if you're not making any insulin and we can't get you healthy enough to get you making insulin again, if that has shut down and it's irreparable, then take
I,
insulin. But when
yeah.
you say like taking 100 units or 150 units a day is crazy, why is it crazy? I mean, can you actually express to people?
I think at that point, if you're taking look, we can look at data and talk to other people and get some general numbers. What's the amount of insulin a non-diabetic produces inside their body? You got exogenous, versus the inside stuff.
Endogenous.
When you yeah, when you there you go. When you look at those numbers, you can see there's a certain range. And if somebody's taking 100, 150 units, I mean, at that point, they must be your insulin sensitivity must be awful. You obviously have to have insulin resistance at that point, unless you're somehow eating, you know, thousands or tens of thousands of carbs or something.
Right. What it generally means to me is that these people are also going to be experiencing huge blood sugar swings during the course of the day. There's no way to balance it out, and unless to have to use that much insulin
Yeah.
means that their blood sugar just got way out of control, and then they're going to have to drive it down again, and that way out of controlness, those high surges in blood sugar lead to a bunch of other health problems
Right.
that nobody really wants to experience.
And going back to your other point, I couldn't agree more on this concept. Again, I know we're talking about type 1 diabetes here. There's a lot of nuanced stuff. And the concept of, you know, can I get to like this idea if I take less and less insulin, I'm getting to a point where I'm not going to need any anymore. And I mean, I guess if you could theoretically get there, I mean, maybe that's okay, but at the cost of heart disease, I mean, and all these other things. If you're really eating that low carb of a diet and that those unhealthy foods, and you don't have energy, I mean, it doesn't seem to be worth it. So you just get to a point where it's like, look, my body's not producing insulin. I got to do the best thing for my overall health, and injecting insulin in most it seems to be the best, the most healthiest thing to do for the highest quality of life and the longest life. But I understand. Like, I want if a low carb person or a diabetic is listening to this, and I want to let them know that I understand. I recognize to a certain extent, life could be easier if my blood sugar doesn't fluctuate, which is what happens when you eat a low carb diet, and I take a little bit less insulin. I understand that concept of managing your diabetes, that would be easier. But I'm telling you, you're going to have low energy. You're not going to feel good. You're increasing your chance for heart disease and other diseases. It's just it's not worth it.
It's really
So
hard on the
for
kidneys.
yeah, there you go. So I mean, so of course I recognize the people when you start following a high carbohydrate diet and you have to take insulin. There's work involved. I mean, let's not avoid that. You have to figure out. You have to do what your body, and it's an infinite intelligence of what a healthy body does on its own. And you have to figure out and calculate how much insulin am I going to take per meal. And when you're eating more carbohydrates, this balance and this ratio of getting the right injection becomes more and more important. And I get that it's work. So each person's just got to figure out a system that works for them. And some people, it's being very consistent with their meals and having go-to meals. Like, this 10 banana smoothie is worth X number of carbs. I know it. You don't really have the luxury of just necessarily just shooting up some insulin and then just going and eating as many bananas as you feel like eating. It doesn't really work like that, and that's just part of dealing with a challenging disease. Type 1 diabetes is, it has its challenges.